I still don't know what all those names are at the start.
In the summer of 1994,
Is that everybody
Hamilton
that worked on the
Township
video? They
in Mercer
pretend they
County,
work.
New Jersey was well known as a safe suburban American community. The neighborhood was filled with families who trusted in the security of their streets and the bonds they shared with neighbors. The Conca family, consisting of parents Maureen and Richard and their 3 children, had lived on Barberley Drive for 16 years. Their youngest, Megan, was a lively 7-year-old, cherished by her family and known for her joyful, trusting nature. The family was active.
¿Qué? Ok, estoy haciendo videos. Estoy haciendo videos.
The security of their streets and the bonds they shared with neighbors. The Conca family, consisting of parents Maureen and Richard and their 3 children, had lived on Barberley Drive for 16 years. Their youngest, Megan, was a lively 7-year-old, cherished by her family and known for her joyful, trusting nature. The family was active in local life, and their home was a gathering place for children and friends. What the Concas and their neighbors did not know was that just across the street lived 3 men with deeply troubling pasts.
Oh, no.
Jesse Temendaquas,
What the fuck,
Joseph
bro? Look at him.
Cifelli,
How you don't-
and
how did
Brian
you
R.
not know?
Janine shared a house owned by Joseph's mother. All 3 men were convicted sex offenders, having
the
met
fuck?
during their incarceration at the Adult
What the
Diagnostic
fuck?
and
Nah, that
Treatment
should not be
Center
allowed,
in
bro.
Avenel, New Jersey, a facility dedicated to treating sex offenders. Jesse had previously been
Treating
convicted
them?
twice for sexually assaulting young girls, serving time before being released early for good behavior. Joseph and Brian also had histories of sexual offenses against children. Despite these backgrounds, there was no
Bro,
legal
you should not be
requirement at
allowed
the
to be
time
friends
for
with people.
authorities
I
to
don't even
notify
know
the
if you should be allowed to be
community or
treated
for
like
the
that.
men
What, they
to
just treat
register
you, you're
their
in there and then like,
presence,
alright, you're
leaving the
good.
neighborhood,
Go
including
ahead,
the
go
Conca
back.
family,
You alright, you solid.
unaware of
Lock
the
'em up,
danger
bro.
in their
Fuck.
midst. On the afternoon of July 29th, 1994, 7-year-old Megan was playing outside her home as she often did. The day began like many others for the family. Megan was last seen in her front yard, riding her bicycle in the familiar surroundings of Barberley
Bro,
Drive.
you gotta pay attention to
Her
your kids,
parents
bro.
trusted
I'm
in
sorry.
the safety of their
I understand.
neighborhood,
Yeah,
never
I
suspecting
understand you
that
think it's
danger
gonna
lurked
you
so
gotta
close to home.
watch out, bro.
When Megan's bicycle was found abandoned on the front lawn and she could not be located, alarm quickly set in. Maureen immediately contacted the police, providing them with a photograph of Megan and a description of the clothes she had been wearing. Within hours, the search for Megan escalated into a massive effort. Hundreds of police officers, firefighters, and volunteers scoured a 3-square-mile area around the Conca home. Flyers were distributed and neighbors went door to door asking if anyone had seen Megan. Among those who offered to help was the previously mentioned Jesse, who lived
Bro.
nearby. He appeared to be a concerned member of the community, even assisting with the distribution of flyers. As the search continued into the evening, police began to focus on the men living at 27 Barbara Lee Drive. When police arrived at the house around 10 p.m. to request permission to search for Megan, Joseph consented. Officers noted that heavy brown blankets were being washed in the machine, a detail that seemed odd but did not immediately raise suspicion. A search of the property and garbage yielded a rope with knots, a waistband from a small pair of pants, and material that matched children's clothing. These items were brought to the Concas the following morning, and Maureen confirmed that the clothing belonged to Megan. Jesse was questioned multiple times by police. Initially, he denied any involvement in Megan's disappearance, providing inconsistent statements about his whereabouts and what he had seen that day. He claimed to have seen Megan riding her bike at different times,
Bro,
but his
get the
timeline
fuck outta
conflicted
here,
with
dog.
statements from other neighbors and his own roommates. Detectives noticed that Jesse repeatedly focused on the time between 6 o'clock and 6:30 p.m., even though he was not specifically prompted to do so. On July 30th, after being confronted with the evidence, clothing identified as Megan's, and inconsistencies in his statements, Jesse's demeanor changed. He asked to speak to his roommate Brian in the presence of detectives. Brian told Jesse, "They got you. You're going to need a friend on the outside. I'll be that friend." At this, Jesse put his head down and admitted, "She's in Mercer County Park." He then confessed that Megan was dead and agreed to show police where he had left her body. In his written and verbal confessions, Jesse provided a detailed account of the crime. He explained that Megan had come to his house
Bro,
to see
look
a
at
puppy,
him, though,
a ruse he
Look
used
at-
to lure her inside
Look
while
at
his
him though,
roommates
bro.
were out.
Like,
Once
come on, bro.
inside, he brought her into his bedroom and began to touch her inappropriately. Megan screamed and tried to escape, but Jesse, fearing she would tell her mother, grabbed her, tearing her shorts in the process. He then took a belt and wrapped it around her neck, pulling her back into the room. Megan fell and began
Like,
to bleed,
how do you not go to
Jesse
him
to place
first?
a plastic
Like,
bag over
motherfucker.
her head to prevent
Where
blood
my kid
from
at,
staining
bro?
the carpet.
They said
He
they lived
used a
across the
second
street
plastic
in
bag
her
to
house,
tie off the first,
and they knew
effectively
they were. Well, I don't know if they
suffocating
knew,
her.
but
The
goddamn,
brutality
3
did
registered
not
sex
end
offenders.
there.
How the fuck?
As Jesse
I don't
was
think you should be
moving
allowed to
Megan's
live with another
body,
registered
his
sex
roommates
offender, bro.
returned home.
I think you just
Believing
encourage
Megan was dead,
wild
he
shit
placed
to
her
go
in
on,
a large
if
toy
that's the
box
case.
he used for tools and carried her downstairs. He loaded the box into his van, intending to dump the body near some power lines, but changed his mind when he saw a police car in the area. Instead, he drove to Mercer County Park about 3 miles away and left her body in tall weeds near a portable toilet. Before leaving, he further violated Megan's body, as later confirmed by autopsy findings and his own statements. Upon returning home, Jesse attempted to destroy evidence by tearing up Megan's shorts and cleaning the crime scene with ammonia to mask her scent. When Maureen Conca asked him if he had seen Megan, he lied, saying he had seen her near a neighbor's driveway. He then continued to participate in the search, handing out flyers and feigning concern. Guided by Jesse, police found Megan's body on the morning of July 30th, 1994 in Mercer County Park. Her remains were concealed in tall weeds with a plastic bag still over her head. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of her family and the community. News of the body's recovery spread quickly, and the Conca family was notified. Megan's father, Richard, was overcome with grief and rage, famously shouting from his porch that someone, quote, ought to burn that house to the ground, referring to the home where his daughter's life had ended. From the autopsy, the cause of death was determined to be mechanical strangulation with a leather belt. There was evidence of both blunt force trauma, 3 separate blows to the head, and sexual assault. The examiner found that there was severe hemorrhaging as a result of the assault. Forensic evidence collected from the crime scene included blood stains, hair and fiber samples, and a bite mark on Jesse's hand that matched Megan's dental records. The brutality of the crime and the revelation that a repeat sex offender lived so close to children without the community's knowledge sparked national outrage. The Conca family and the public demanded legislative action to prevent similar tragedies. The case quickly became a catalyst for legal reform, with widespread media coverage amplifying calls for change. Megan's parents argued that if they had known about Jesse's criminal history, they would have taken precautions to protect their daughter. Their advocacy, combined with public pressure, led New Jersey lawmakers to act swiftly. Within weeks, New Jersey passed a set of statutes known as Megan's Law, requiring law enforcement to notify communities when a convicted sex offender moves into their area. The law also established a sex offender registry accessible to the public. In 1996, the U.S. Congress passed federal legislation signed by President Bill Clinton requiring all states to implement similar community notification and registration systems for sex offenders. This federal mandate standardized the approach across the country, although implementation details vary by state. As for Jesse, he was ultimately convicted of kidnapping, assault, and murder. His trial, held in 1997, resulted in a guilty verdict on all counts. He was sentenced to death,
I didn't know
but
this was
his
that old. I
sentence
wasn't
was
paying
later
attention to the
commuted
date.
to life
I thought
imprisonment
they were talking about,
without
like, early
parole
2010s or
after New
something.
Jersey abolished the death penalty in 2007.
François Verove.
Francois Verove was born on January 22nd, 1962 in the coastal town of Gravelines, located in the Nord department of northern France.
He looked like Bundy
His
a
father,
little bit, huh?
Roger, worked for the merchant navy, a profession that often kept him away from home for extended periods. His mother, Michelle, was a homemaker who played a central role in Francois' early upbringing. In September 1972, when Francois was just 10 years old, tragedy struck the family. His mother, Michelle, fell seriously ill and was hospitalized in Lille due to a rapid decline in her health. She died at the young age of 36, only 2 days before the family's new house was completed. The loss of his mother had a profound and destabilizing effect on the young boy, who was left without his primary caregiver at a formative age. After Michelle's death, Roger, devastated and unable to care for his son due to work commitments, made the difficult decision to entrust Francois to his maternal grandparents during the work week. The grandparents residing in Mouveau near Lille became responsible for Francois' daily upbringing from age 10 to 12, while his father would only see him on weekends. This arrangement, driven by necessity, introduced a sense of displacement and instability during a critical developmental period. Following his mother's death, Roger eventually remarried and Francois gained a stepmother and 2 half-sisters. The new blended family settled in a suburb of Lille, but the transition was not smooth. Francois' relationship with his father was described as strict and authoritarian, and the emotional distance between them reportedly widened over time. The presence of a stepmother and half-siblings further complicated familial bonds, leaving Francois feeling isolated within his own household. One of the most significant and disturbing aspects of Francois's early life was the trauma he later revealed in adulthood. According to statements he made to a psychiatrist, he was abused by his father at the age of 10, coinciding with the period shortly after his mother's death. This revelation, which emerged many years later, cast a shadow over his entire adolescence and is believed to have contributed to his later psychological struggles. The abuse, coupled with the loss of his mother and the instability of his living arrangements, left Francois deeply scarred. He developed symptoms of depression and melancholia, becoming a withdrawn and troubled child. Accounts from those who knew him during his teenage years described him as prone to suicidal thoughts and emotional volatility.
Damn.
He confided in at least one friend about his desire to end his life, even suggesting a suicide pact. Throughout his adolescence,
I'm not gonna lie, bro. The homie comes up to me like, you gotta help your friend out. Don't do that. Don't be bugging out.
To his new family structure and felt disconnected from both his father and
this got to do with me, though?
The trauma of abuse and the absence of
Hey,
his
man, I didn't
mother
sign up for that,
compounded
man.
his
What the
sense of
fuck?
isolation. During this period, Francois developed a fascination with horror films, particularly those that were graphic and violent. This interest in macabre cinema was seen by some as an outlet for his inner turmoil, providing a means of escape or expression for feelings he could not articulate otherwise. Academically, his path was unremarkable but steady. He obtained his BEPC in 1979, a standard French secondary school diploma. He then enrolled in a vocational program to become an electromechanic, motivated by the desire for financial independence and the hope of leaving the family home as soon as possible. As part of his studies, he worked as a mechanic in a local factory, gaining practical experience and earning some income. Despite his ambitions, Francois did not complete his vocational qualification and was unable to achieve the autonomy he sought before his mandatory military service. His inability to earn the diploma delayed his departure from the family home, prolonging his exposure to a difficult domestic environment. In January 1980, Francois sought to reconnect with his maternal relatives, from whom he had been largely separated since his mother's death. Without informing his father, he resumed contact with his maternal grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. This reconnection provided some measure of emotional support and a sense of belonging that had been missing from his life for years. As he phased out of adolescence and entered early adulthood, Francois continued to struggle within himself. He was determined to break free from the constraints of his upbringing, yet found himself repeatedly thwarted by circumstances and his own emotional baggage. During this period, he was described as having frequent mood swings, periods of deep sadness, and episodes of anger that could flare unexpectedly. Friends and acquaintances recalled that he seemed to harbor a deep-seated rage that he struggled to contain. In 1983, Francois began his career in law enforcement by joining the National Gendarmerie, France's military police force responsible for public safety and law enforcement, especially in rural and suburban areas. He was initially assigned as a motorcyclist in the Republican Guard, a ceremonial and security unit that also provides protection for government officials and public buildings. This position required discipline, physical fitness, and a high level of trust, as the Republican Guard is often seen as an elite branch. During his years in service, Francois developed a reputation for being diligent and reliable, traits that allowed him to integrate seamlessly into the community. Colleagues later described him as polite, helpful, and normal, which contributed to his ability to avoid suspicion for so many years. In 1988, after 5 years in the gendarmerie, Francois transferred to the National Police, which operates primarily in urban areas and is responsible for criminal investigations, public order, and general policing duties. He was posted in Paris, specifically in the Hauts-de-Seine department, a densely populated and diverse region bordering the French capital. This transfer marked a significant step in his career, as the National Police is tasked with handling major crimes, including homicide, sexual assaults, and organized crime. While most of Francois's law enforcement career appeared unremarkable, there were moments of controversy. Reports indicate that he was dismissed from one assignment in 1986 due to a possible affair of vice in the Bois de Boulogne, a park in Paris known for illicit activities after dark. The specifics of this incident remain unclear, but it suggests that there may have been early warning signs of inappropriate behavior that were either overlooked or insufficiently investigated. Between 1986 and 1994, there was a series of violent crimes in and around Paris committed by a perpetrator who was known locally as Le Grêle, or the Pockmarked Man. These included multiple murders, rapes, attempted murders, and abductions. And as you likely suspect, this criminal turned out to be none other than the law enforcement officer Francois. His crimes were marked by extreme brutality, careful planning, and the calculated use of his position as a police officer to gain access to victims and avoid suspicion. His first known attack occurred in the 13th arrondissement. An unnamed 8-year-old girl encountered him in her apartment building's elevator as she was heading to school. Francois forcibly dragged her to the building's basement, where he raped her and attempted to strangle her with a cord. Presuming she was dead, he fled the scene. Miraculously, the girl survived and was able to alert authorities, providing an early but incomplete glimpse into the attacker. Less than a month later, 11-year-old Cécile Bloch was attacked in the elevator of her apartment building at 116 Rue Petit. Francois forced her into the basement,
we should start checking these fucking apartments
then
up.
Stabbed and strangled her. Her body was found later that day, wrapped in a carpet. Witnesses, including her family, described the attacker as a man with acne-scarred skin, which is what led to the nickname. This murder shocked Paris and set off a massive investigation. Nearly a year after the murder, Francois committed one of his most gruesome crimes. In the Marais district, he targeted the apartment of Gilles Politi, a 38-year-old Air France mechanic, and his 20-year-old German au pair, Irmgard Muller. Both were found dead in the apartment. Politi was stripped naked, bound, and strangled with a garrote, while Irmgard was hung by her arms from a bunk bed and had her throat slashed. Both victims bore cigarette burns indicating torture prior to death. The killer left behind evidence of careful planning, including the use of a pseudonym and a false address that traced back to a former police office. Witnesses reported seeing a young athletic man entering the building and communicating with Irmgard via intercom shortly before the murders. Then in October of 1987, a 14-year-old girl returning home from school was stopped by Francois, who identified himself as a police officer. He claimed he needed to question her for an investigation. Once inside her apartment, he handcuffed and raped her, then burglarized the home before leaving. The survivor's description matched those from the previous crimes, but it was not until years later that DNA evidence confirmed the same perpetrator was responsible for this attack and the earlier murders. After this incident, it seemed like there was a period of apparent inactivity. However, in June of 1994, Francois resurfaced in Mitry-Mory. He approached 11-year-old Ingrid G as she was cycling along a railway line, demanding she get into his car under the pretense of taking her to the police station. He drove her over an hour away to an abandoned farm in Saclay-Essonne, where he raped her for several hours. Unlike earlier attacks, he left Ingrid alive, and she was able to provide authorities with information that contributed to the investigation. DNA from this attack was soon linked to earlier cases, confirming the same individual was responsible. That same year, 19-year-old Corinne Leroy disappeared while on her way to school in Meaux, near Paris. Her body was discovered more than a month later in a wooded area. While not all details have been publicly confirmed on this case, French authorities have attributed this murder to Francois based on similarities in modus operandi and forensic evidence. He is suspected in several other unsolved murders and assaults, including the killings of young girls and women in the Paris region during the late 1980s and early 1990s. However, the full extent of his crimes remains unknown. The police continued to collect evidence and re-examine files, but the killer remained elusive.
Damn,
the
bro, I'm about to fall
suspect's
asleep,
apparent
bro.
insider knowledge led some detectives to theorize that he was a member of the police. This theory gained traction after advances in DNA analysis allowed investigators to definitively link the previously mentioned double murder of Gilles Politi and Irmgard Muller to that of Cecile Bloch. This connection, which was made in 2001, established that a single individual was responsible for multiple crimes, confirming the existence of a serial offender. A critical development occurred in 2014 when Judge Natalie Turkey took over the case. Recognizing the unique challenges posed by the investigation, she ordered a comprehensive review of all evidence and began exploring the possibility that the killer was a former or serving member of law enforcement. This hypothesis was supported by behavioral analyses, witness testimonies, and the killer's use of police paraphernalia. By around 2019, the investigation had zeroed in on a crucial insight. The killer's methods and access suggested he was likely a gendarme stationed in the Paris region during the 1980s and 1990s. Investigators compiled a list of 750 former officials who fit this profile and prepared to conduct DNA testing on each one. On September 24, 2021, Francois, now retired, received a summons to provide a DNA sample. Realizing that the net was closing in, he abruptly left his home. His wife reported him missing on September 27th, prompting concern among his family and colleagues. He traveled to Le Grau du Roi, a small coastal town in southern France, where he rented an apartment. On September 29, 2021, he took his own life, ingesting a lethal combination of alcohol and substances. He left behind a note addressed to his wife, in which he confessed to being, quote, a great criminal who committed unforgivable deeds until the end of the 1990s, and claimed to have been driven by uncontrollable impulses. He also stated that he had done nothing since 1997, suggesting the possibility of additional, as yet undiscovered, crimes. Following this death, investigators obtained a DNA sample from Francois's body and compared it to the profiles from the crime scenes. The results were unequivocal. His DNA matched the evidence from multiple murders and rapes attributed to the criminal dubbed as the Pockmarked Man. This confirmation brought a dramatic end to a 35-year manhunt and provided long-awaited answers to the families of the victims. However, the resolution of the case also left many questions unanswered. This conclusion and the vague confession deprived investigators of the opportunity to interrogate Francois about the full extent of his crimes, his motivations, and possible additional victims.
They can't be doing that shit though. What do you mean send it in? Is it because of the cop that you give them that courtesy? Or is it because of France? I don't know. But
accomplices
I heard that in the US when they catch killers, bro, they just wait outside their house when they throw the garbage out. They find a bottle.
Former police officer sent shockwaves through France. For years, Francois had maintained the facade of a model citizen, raising a family, serving as a local counselor, and even appearing on a television game show in 2019. The news that he had committed such heinous acts while serving as a police officer led to widespread disbelief and outrage. The case prompted renewed scrutiny of unsolved crimes from the era and sparked national conversations about police oversight, psychological screening, and the need for greater accountability within law enforcement.
I'm gonna have to take a piss real quick. We got 13 minutes left. There's mad dirt in my fucking headphones. These AirPods, dog. Mad sawdust. I wear them on the way home from work. Cause the vehicle speaker. Isn't that good? And fuck yeah. Goddamn, I'll have like sawdust in my hair, and when I put them on, it'll like get trapped in there and make my ears itch. I think I gotta holding my business too long, bro. Way too fucking long. I kinda got a shit though. Am I gonna wait that long? I can wait for this shit. Let me see if I can get it. Quick sidebar. I'm probably gonna leave this in the video. Just took a piss. Had to cut that out of the video. But how do you feel about hydration? Like staying hydrated? Because as a kid, like as a fucking child, I always used to hear they'd say what the fuck? They'd say you gotta drink like 8 bottles a day, I think. They'd say 8 bottles. And I used to be like, 8 bottles, goddamn. And like, but now, recently what I've been hearing is if you piss and it's clear, like straight, which I used to think was like, yo, shit, I'm drinking good. Because I used to drink mad soda. And my shit was never really clear like that. And then when I started drinking more water to get clear, I'm like, all right, well, I'm doing better. But I heard that the clear piss is bad. Like, it's not good. You're drinking too much. So my thing was always like, how the fuck is it that's supposed to be 8 a day? And then I'm drinking too much because my piss doesn't look. I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna listen to my body. You know, if I see it and they're telling me that's not the way, that ain't the way. I'm not just gonna be sitting here chugging the bottles up because you're telling me it's good. Shit, you know what I mean? But that was a quick sidebar. Sidney Powell.
Sidney Powell was born and raised in Akron, Ohio. Her mother,
Braun.
Brenda, was a highly respected child life specialist at Akron Children's Hospital, where she worked in the hematology oncology unit and founded the hospital's oncology teen program. Brenda was known for her compassion and dedication not only to her patients, but also to her own family. She was described as selfless and energetic, someone who planned activities for families and helped them through the most difficult moments of their lives. Sidney's father, Stephen, was also a prominent figure in her life, as well as her younger brother, Andrew. Sidney attended St. Vincent St. Mary High School, a well-known Catholic institution in the area. She would graduate from high school in 2018, and her teachers remembered her as a good student who cared about her grades and participated actively in class. After high school, Sidney enrolled at the University of Mount Union in Alliance, Ohio in the fall of 2018. The university was less than an hour from Akron, allowing her to return home easily if needed. Sidney was initially excited about starting college and received a scholarship, which her father recalled was the Presidential Scholarship.
Still trying to figure out if
something
she's the victim or the killer.
Despite her enthusiasm, Sidney struggled to settle on a specific field of study. During her first year at Mount Union, she began to experience academic difficulties. She was placed on academic probation after her first year due to poor grades, but she did not share these struggles with her parents or friends. When her academic performance failed to improve during the fall semester of her second year, the university suspended her and unenrolled her from classes. Despite this, Sidney continued to live in her dormitory and maintained the appearance of being a student, attending campus events and following her previous routines. Her friends began to notice inconsistencies, such as her name tag being removed from her dorm room and her absence from sorority events. When questioned, she explained these differences by claiming there was some confusion with the university administration. Mount Union officials soon discovered that Sydney was still living in the dorms despite her suspension. Michelle Gaffney, an administrator in the student life department, confronted Sydney and arranged a meeting to address her failure to move out of campus housing. Initially, Sydney insisted that she was still a student and that the issue had been resolved with her professors, but she eventually admitted to being suspended when pressed by the administrator. That whole time, Sydney never informed her parents about her academic probation or suspension at any point. Even after being required to move out of her dorm, she continued to conceal the truth from her family. When offered help by university staff to contact her parents, Sydney adamantly refused and finally moved her belongings out of the dorm after a third meeting. For several days, she stayed in local hotels, only visiting her family home when her parents were not there, and kept in touch with friends via text messages. On the evening of March 2nd, 2020, Sydney returned to campus to watch The Bachelor with friends, maintaining the facade of normalcy. Sydney's father began to suspect that something was wrong when he was unable to access the parent financial portal for Mount Union. When he asked his daughter about the issue, she assured him that she would resolve it. The next morning, he received a call from Mount Union informing him that Sydney was no longer enrolled at the university and that he should speak with Sydney for more information. Using a location sharing app, Sydney's father saw that Sydney was at home at a time when she should have been on campus. It was at this time that he decided to leave work and go home to confront her. When he arrived home, he found Sydney and questioned her about her academic status. Sydney expressed frustration about her life and compared herself to her friends, who she felt had figured out their paths while she had not. Stephen urged Sydney to talk to her mother, Brenda, about the situation. Brenda was then contacted on the spot, and she left work to come home and address the issue with her daughter. At 12:36 p.m., Brenda texted Stephen that she was pulling up into the driveway. From there, she called Mount Union to discuss the situation with Sydney right beside her. It was during this call that a violent and tragic outburst erupted from Sydney. According to testimony from the dean and associate dean of students, the phone conversation with Brenda had barely begun when they heard a loud thump or thud, followed by a scream and the sound of air being expelled, as if someone had been struck with force. The phone then fell to the ground and a series of thumping sounds continued for about 15 seconds. The officials heard crying and screaming that seemed to move away from and then back toward the phone, followed by the sound of a hard object striking something repeatedly. The call abruptly ended. Within about a minute and a half, the university officials attempted to call back. On the third attempt, a calm voice answered, but the dean immediately recognized that it was not Brenda.
You're in college,
When he addressed Sydney by name, the call was disconnected. The university staff, deeply alarmed by what they had heard and the suspicious response, contacted the Akron Police Department directly to request a welfare check at the Powell residence. At approximately 12:51 p.m., Stephen Powell received a call from his friend, Detective Kenneth Dyes, who had recognized the Powell family's address in police radio traffic. Kenneth informed Stephen that officers were en route to his home for a welfare check. Stephen attempted to reach his wife, Brenda, but was unsuccessful. However, he did speak with Sydney, who initially told him that Brenda was on the phone with Mount Union officials. When Stephen informed Sydney that police were on their way, she became hysterical and claimed that someone had broken into the house. Police arrived at the home soon after the welfare call was made. Upon arrival, officers heard a woman crying for help from inside the house. At the back of the house, they found an open window, a sliding glass door ajar, and blood on the vertical blinds, signs that suggested a possible break-in or staged scene. Sydney was found outside, yelling that her mother was in the back of the house. She told officers that after hearing a noise, her mother instructed her to leave the house, and that when she returned, she found Brenda on the floor. Sydney had cuts on her hand that were actively bleeding. Inside the house, officers discovered Brenda lying face up on the bedroom floor, surrounded by a significant amount of blood. Nearby, they found a large cast iron skillet, a kitchen knife, and a cell phone, items later determined to be the murder weapons. Brenda was unresponsive and was later pronounced dead at the hospital. Sydney initially provided her name, but soon dropped to the pavement and became non-responsive,
I was weak as fuck in school because I didn't try. When I tried,
She was
It was my
transported to the
sophomore year,
hospital
my
for a
last year of school. I
psychiatric
dropped out that year. I was
evaluation and
depressed.
quickly became the
But I
primary
tried in
suspect
school.
in
I didn't
her
do any
mother's
homework out of
death.
school, and I went
Multiple
straight
samples were
B's to the
collected
fucking
from blood
cruise,
evidence
bro.
at the
It's not
scene
crazy.
and submitted to the
You going to
Ohio
college, you're
Bureau of
supposed to be
Criminal
doing that. You're supposed to
Investigation for
get at it,
analysis.
man. What are you doing?
The
You fucked
results
it up. It's
showed
cool.
that both
Just move on
Sydney's
then.
and Brenda's
You're not in college.
DNA
You
were present
couldn't
in
do it. All right,
several
cool.
of the
Get a job.
samples,
Find
further
your own path. You
implicating
gotta find
Sydney
it.
in the attack.
Don't be doing
The
this
presence
wild
of
shit,
her
dog.
own
What are we
blood,
talking
coupled
about?
with the injuries to her
Killed her
hands,
fucking mom.
indicated
That's
that
wild,
Sydney had been
bro.
directly involved in the violent
Like
struggle.
it's her fault
The
or
medical
something.
examiner, Dr.
That you were
Robert
over here being
Schott,
fraudulent,
performed an
acting like you're still a
autopsy and
student and shit.
documented many stab wounds and several incised wounds, primarily on the neck and lower face. Specifically, Brenda suffered 23 separate stab
God
wounds
damn,
and
man.
3 incised wounds on the front and side of her neck, as well as 4 stab and 2 incised wounds on her left shoulder, arm, and hand. The fatal wounds severed the jugular veins and
Holy
carotid
fuck.
arteries, leading to death by loss of blood to the brain. Dr. Schott concluded that the cause of death was multiple sharp and blunt force injuries and classified the manner of death as homicide. Sydney's initial statements to police mirrored what she had told her father. She claimed that someone had broken into the house and that her mother had told her to leave. She said she returned to find her mother injured on the floor. However, officers quickly noted inconsistencies in her account, as well as physical evidence that contradicted her narrative. Sydney's hands were covered in blood and she appeared both frantic and confused. When asked if she had been cut, she replied, "I don't think so. I was helping her," despite the visible injuries on her hands. Her demeanor fluctuated dramatically. She was initially hysterical, asking if her mother would be okay and crying
Dog,
out
is
for
this
her
her? I don't
father,
think this is a
but
photo of her.
soon became unresponsive, dropping to
Is
the
it?
pavement and ceasing to
different person.
answer questions. Police body cam footage captured Sydney
what the fuck?
lying
Oh
on
my
the
God, this was in
driveway,
2020?
alternating between emotional outbursts and a catatonic state. This erratic
I think
behavior,
I've seen
combined
this
with the
body
evidence
cam
at the
before,
scene,
bro.
led officers to suspect that Sydney was not merely a witness or bystander, but was directly involved in the attack. Given her mental and emotional state, Sydney was transported by EMS to Akron General
is
Hospital for
pre-COVID.
an
What
emergency
the fuck?
psychiatric evaluation. She was involuntarily admitted and remained hospitalized until March 16th. During her stay, she underwent multiple assessments by mental health professionals who documented signs of severe psychological distress. Medical records from the weeks following the murder indicated that those treating Sydney uniformly
Yo, can I be
recognized
honest
that
though?
she was
Like,
suffering
that's
from a
fucked up. You
serious
know,
mental
she
illness.
got mental disorder.
As
That's
the
cool.
investigation
That's fucked
progressed,
up.
the Summit
You
County
gotta lock
Grand
her.
Jury indicted
She
Sydney
killed her mom,
on
bro.
2
I don't give a
counts
fuck,
of
bro.
murder,
You killing your mom,
purposeful
bro.
and felony murder,
Get up
1
outta here,
count
man.
of felonious assault, and
Yeah,
1
hey,
count of
listen,
tampering
man.
with evidence.
You
She
got mental
entered
issues,
a
that's,
plea of
you know.
not guilty by reason of
Hope you
insanity,
get
asserting that
help
she
with
was
those,
in
but
a
you ain't
psychotic
just
state due
killing your
to
mom getting
severe
off,
mental
man.
illness at the time of the killing. Her defense team retained multiple expert witnesses to evaluate her mental health and support her claim. The state, in turn, presented its own expert, who reviewed her recent social history, phone records, and academic records, ultimately concluding that Sydney was not suffering from a severe mental disease at the time of the murder and that she was well aware of the wrongfulness of her actions. Throughout the trial, the prosecution highlighted Sydney's attempts to cover up the crime, including staging the scene and providing
She did try to
inconsistent
cover that shit
statements
up.
as evidence that she
That's a fact.
understood what she had done was wrong. The defense maintained that Sydney's severe mental illness rendered her incapable of rational thought or understanding the consequences of her actions. After more than 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Sydney Powell guilty on all counts in September 2023. She was sentenced to an indefinite term of 15 years to life in prison. Not long after, Sydney's defense team appealed the conviction, focusing primarily on the trial court's refusal to allow them to present rebuttal expert testimony after the prosecution's expert introduced new critiques of their methodology during the trial. The defense argued that this denial violated Sydney's right to a fair trial and due process. Other arguments on appeal included claims of prosecutorial misconduct, such as eliciting testimony about Sydney's desire to remain silent and consult counsel, and the admission of prejudicial evidence, including graphic photos and testimony about the victim's injuries. In December 2024, the 9th District Court of Appeals reversed Sydney's conviction. The appellate court found that the trial judge erred by not allowing the defense to present rebuttal testimony, emphasizing that Sydney had an unconditional right to address new critiques introduced by the state's expert. The court reasoned that the right to rebuttal is particularly important when the prosecution's expert introduces new facts or critiques not previously addressed, and that the trial judge's rationale, citing the volume of expert testimony already presented, was insufficient to justify denying rebuttal. The appellate court's decision was based solely on this procedural error, and it did not address the other arguments raised on appeal. Prosecutors strongly disagreed with the appellate ruling, arguing that it broke with over a century
So is there
of
a new
legal
trial or
precedent
what?
and could have far-reaching consequences for trial procedures throughout Ohio. They asserted that the ruling could allow for endless cycles of rebuttal and surrebuttal, disrupting the established order of criminal trials. The Summit County Prosecutor's Office petitioned the Ohio Supreme Court to overturn the appellate decision and reinstate Sydney's conviction, characterizing the case as one of great constitutional importance and warning that it could fundamentally alter the order of trials in the state. Sydney's defense maintained that the right to rebuttal was essential for a fair trial, especially when the state's experts introduced new critiques of their experts' methodologies. As of June
So they don't allow you to
2025,
rebuttal?
the case remains pending before the Ohio Supreme Court, with no hearing date set and a final
Ohio?
decision awaited.
They really fucked up not letting them rebuttal. I mean, what the fuck were they gonna rebuttal? It was clear as day she killed her mom. With intent. What the fuck are we talking about? That was some dumbass shit. I'm not gonna lie. I hope she's not out. I hope the case pending and she's up in there locked up, bro. What are we talking about?